أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على رسوله الكريم وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. My dear respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman here and online, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have been discussing the 30th juz of the Holy Quran. Today, inshallah, we'll start anew. I want to make sure that we get as much as possible in the last few nights to get a grasp of the verses in the chapters of the Quran. So inshallah, we will move on to Surah Abasa today, inshallah, and try to cover some aspects of it so that we get an understanding. A very important surah in terms of giving us some guidance on the principles of the Quran and how we understand the Quran al-Majid wal-Furqan al-Hamid. And in this we will understand that there are some very important differences about how people do tafsir of the Quran and on what basis they do the tafsir of the Quran and why that's very important. And depending on how you do the interpretation of the Quran and the exegesis of the Quran, it has a big impact on your belief system. And we'll see that just in the opening verses of Surah Abasa. It's a verse that is according to most Mufassirin, it is Makki in nature. Some have argued that it's possibly Madani in terms of its nature, but you'll see why that is the case. And so, let's just begin, inshaAllah. A'udhu billahi min shaitan la'in ar-rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Abasa wa tawalla an ja'ahu al-a'ma wa ma yudrika la'allahu yazzakka aw yazzakkaru fatanfa'uhu zikra. Amma man istaghna. So we'll stop here. First 5 verses and then we'll continue from there, inshallah. He frowned and he turned away, because came unto him the blind man. And what maketh thee to know that he would cleanse himself? Or he warned and profiteth him the warning. As for him who thinketh himself independent on account of his wealth. So this is a very interesting. The verse begins here, as you know, Abasa. It's interesting to note here, Abasa is also the same root word of the name Abbas, according to some traditions, where Abbas means the one who frowns, or who is able to make his enemy frown in the battlefield, in terms of from the haybat of Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, the presence of him. Nonetheless, so he frowned and he turned away. This is the first verse. Abasa wa tawalla. He frowned and he turned away. So now the first question that emerges here is, who frowned and who turned away? And that's a very important question according to the Mufassirin. And depending on who the Mufassir is, different answers come forward to us. The next one is, because cameth unto him the blind man. And ja'ahul a'ma. So the Quran is saying, look very clearly, he frowned and turned away because a blind man came to him. Now, who frowned and who turned away at the sight of when they saw a blind person? This is a very important question that we need to look at in terms of this. And what maketh thee to know what he would that he would cleanse himself? So, how do you know? He may cleanse himself. So this also, who is being addressed in this third verse is also very important. We need to look at that as well. أَوْ يَذَكَّرُ فَتَنْفَعُهُ الذِّكْرَى. Or he warned and profiteth him the warning. So there's a few different narrations that I want to share with this that are from the Muslim world, and then inshallah we'll come to our interpretation of what is our belief system as to why were these verses in particular revealed. And when we look at what is our belief system with respect to why these verses were revealed, you will find a difference in how some other Muslims interpret this. And this is very important because this gets at the essence of Rasulullah. Does the Muslim world, do we as Muslims believe that Rasulullah is just like us, or we are just like him? And that's something that's very important for us to look at and consider. Because how you interpret the Quran will have an impact on your belief system. So some people believe, for example, that na'udhu billah hasha min dhalik, that Rasulullah can make a mistake. Of course, we don't believe that, but some people do. And if they believe that, then what's to say that Rasulullah, God forbid, could make a mistake in revealing or sharing the Quran, for example? Of course he cannot. Of course he did not. No way. But some Muslims, because they believe that Rasulullah was like them or we are like him, then the interpretation that emerges is, oh, Rasulullah can do something that's wrong. And this is something that's very key that we're getting from Surah Abasa, that do we understand the position of Rasulullah? Do we understand the maqam of Rasulullah? Do we understand his prestige in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And if we do not understand the prestige of the Holy Prophet and the Holy Messenger in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we need to stop and pause and reflect for a moment as to what is his position. So therefore, he frowned and he turned away. The first interpretation coming to that, according to our brothers in Ahl Sunnah, they believe and they say that the one who is being addressed here is he frowned and turned away because a blind man came to him. According to Mufassirin, is Rasulullah. They say it's the Holy Prophet. They say, according to them, Rasulullah is the one who, when a blind man came, he turned around and he frowned. He turned away and he frowned. Now, the question that we ask is it befitting of the Holy Prophet of Islam, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he is at the height of akhlaq, he is at the height of moral character. Is it possible that the Holy Prophet, if a blind man who comes onto him, maybe speaking to him or asking him a question, he just turns away and frowns? How is that possible? How is that feasible? And so that's something that we need to reflect on. That's something that we need to look at with respect to the position of the Holy Prophet. Is it possible that the Holy Prophet would do something like this? إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمُ الْأَخْلَاقِ We've been told that the Holy Prophet is the best of character, makarim al-akhlaq. There are two types of akhlaq according to the ulama of ethics. There's a makarim al-akhlaq and there's mahasin al-akhlaq. Mahasin al-akhlaq is that akhlaq or that ethics. Mahasin is, for example, you do something good to me or you do something good for me. Maybe you give me a gift, or maybe, for example, you say something nice about me, and I do the same back to you. So for example, you treated me nicely, you gave me a gift. Tomorrow, day after, a week later, I also treat you nicely and I give you a gift. And say, for example, you didn't treat me nicely, you didn't treat me nice, and I also don't treat you nice. Mahasin al-akhlaq is basically mirroring the other person. So mahasin, you did something good for me, I do something good for you. Makarim al-akhlaq is different. Makarim al-akhlaq is no matter if you do good to me or bad to me, doesn't matter, I will still do good to you. Makarim al-akhlaq is the height of akhlaq, the height of ethics, that is, and morals and etiquette. So this is a Rasulullah's example, where there's a moment in time where Rasulullah is passing, the very famous story, he passes by the same path every single day. And when he passes by the same path every day, the same lady throws rubbish and trash on Rasulullah the same day, every day. And as this happens every single day, one day she's not there. When she's not there that one day, according to the traditions, Rasulullah has the opportunity, as you and I can imagine, he has the opportunity, of course he's much above this, to do revenge, to seek revenge, to throw rubbish on her. Of course he would never. But the principle here is, Rasulullah went and asked, how is she doing? And he said, is there anything I can assist you with? When he found out she was ill. And so the principle that we get from this is that makarim al-akhlaq is that no matter how someone treats you, you still treat them well. And this is the height of akhlaq. This is the height of that position. So Rasulullah, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ Allah says that you've given you the best moral character. You have the best conduct. So how is it possible now, coming back to this verse, that he frowned and he turned away refers to Rasulullah? But according to most of the mufassirin of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, our brothers in Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they believe it's Rasulullah. Of course, we disagree on this. We don't accept that it's Rasulullah being addressed here. We have a different view, and it's very clear from our traditions about this, the revelation of these verses as to who is being addressed here and who is the main person that is being discussed here. So, because came unto him the blind man. That's the reason. And what makes you know that he would cleanse himself? So this is also giving us context, that Allah is addressing someone here. Is that person Rasulullah? Is that entity Rasulullah? Who is that entity? That's a question we also have to look at. Now, with respect to the other traditions, Shaykh al-Tusi also comments here. Remember, there's two very, very important tafseers in our school of thought. There's the tafsir of Tibyan, which is by Shaykh al-Tusi, and there's tafsir al-Majma' al-Bayan, which is by Shaykh Tabarsi. Now, that work is the one that it builds. Majma' al-Bayan builds on the work of Tibyan. Majma' al-Bayan, if you recall, was the scholar Shaykh Tabarsi. He was buried in the ground, but he was alive. He had a heart attack and then they buried him. And there was a grave robber, a grave digger, who came to try to steal his kafan, because they used to do that this time. Unfortunately, there's still people who do this. And so when they tried to steal the kafan, I mentioned this at the beginning, some people may remember, some may not, at the beginning of our series. And so Shaykh Tabarsi was under the ground and had been buried, and when he had been buried at that point in time, they said to Shaykh Tabarsi is in the darkness of the grave, and he wakes up from his unconsciousness, and he makes another to Allah. He says, Ya Allah, if you get me out of this predicament, then I will do a tafsir of the Quran. And lo and behold, a grave digger came, tried to steal his kafan. When he tried to steal his kafan, Shaykh Tabarsi grabbed his hand, and he came out, and I'm sure maybe the thief maybe was scared to death, quite literally. And nonetheless, he wrote Majma' al-Bayan, which is a very important tafsir. So here, when we look at the verses of Surah Abasa, we will reflect on the reflections of Shaykh al-Tusi in Tibyan, which laid the foundation that Shaykh Tabarsi built on in Majma' al-Bayan. So what happened here? So our brothers in Ahlul Sunnah say the person being referred to here is Rasulullah. We, of course, disagree, adamantly, actually. Because it's you and I, can you imagine, if a poor blind man came in front of us, would we, as the verse says, Abasa wa tawalla, would we turn away and frown? Even we, who are much lower than the position of Rasulullah, we would have the insight to say, that's not the right thing to do. So how on earth can Rasulullah do something like this? So what is our belief system? Now, Shaykh al-Tusi, stay with me here, because Shaykh al-Tusi says something interesting here. Now, there's a very famous narration, because remember, this is a Meccan, according to vast majority of the Mufassirin, this is a Meccan surah, in terms of the Meccan period, before Hijrah. So, what happened? Rasulullah called on to some elites of Meccan society, which included good and bad people, a mix of different people, and he called on them because they were the influencers of society. So if one of them came on board, or two of them came on board, what would happen was many other people, would become easy for them to become Muslims. This is how the tradition goes. So for example, you'll remember Abu Jahl actually, he basically violated Rasulullah and disrespected Rasulullah in the worst way. And then Hazrat Hamza, the uncle of Rasulullah, he used to always, every day, do a tawaf of the Kaaba and go for hunting. And when he would do the tawaf of the Kaaba and then go hunting, he would come back after hunting. Hamza was a very, very famous and very renowned warrior, Hazrat Hamza. He's also known as the first Sayyid al-Shuhada, according to traditions, the uncle of the Holy Prophet, Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. So one day he's coming back, he does the tawaf and he goes on his hunting journey, and he comes back. On his way back, he sees a lady. The lady says, "Oh Hamza," because Hamza was a very renowned warrior. He said, "Hamza, will you either not defend your nephew, or will you put him out of his misery? Pick up between these two." He said, "Why do you say that? Either join him or put him out of his misery." He said, "I say this because Abu Jahl has dishonored and disrespected him in the worst way today. He's been doing it, but today he disrespected him beyond any bound." Hazrat Hamza said, "Oh really? Interesting." At that point, no, apparently he's not Muslim at that point. According to the narration, Hazrat Hamza then asks, "Where is Abu Jahl?" He finds out. When he finds out, he goes to the tent where he is. And when he goes to the tent where he is, he takes his arrow, not the arrow, but the bow, and he takes the metal part of it, or not the string part of it, the arc part of it, and he hits Abu Jahl on the head very hard. When he hits him, now Abu Jahl would have lost it. Remember, Abu Jahl, we call him Abu Jahl. The Meccans called him Abu al-Hakam, the father of wisdom. We call him the father of ignorance. And that was the title that was given to him. So nonetheless, he got very upset. Anyone else, he would have attacked them. But it was Hamza, so he had fear. So he didn't want, because Hamza was a warrior, well-known warrior. He couldn't touch Hamza. He said, you disrespect my nephew while I am on his religion? So at that point in time, Hazrat Hamza made it clear that he's on the path of Rasulullah. So after that, no one ever touched him, Rasulullah, that way, while Hazrat Hamza was alive. Of course, in the Battle of Uhud, Hazrat Hamza was shaheed, he was martyred, and that's why his liver was eaten by Hind, the cannibalism that took place. And the Ahlul Bayt were very devastated by that. Rasulullah called the women to mourn over Hazrat Hamza, and even in ziyarat we say, وَلَعْنَ اللَّهُ وَابْنَ آكِلَةَ الْأَكْبَادِ, and la'an on the one who is the descendant of the one who ate the liver. Referring to Hazrat Hamza. So that really hurt the Ahlul Bayt when she did that in the Battle of Uhud. So that was a very big loss. But when Hamza came, that opened the door for other people to come in. Remember, when the early Muslims became Muslim, they had to be, many of them were in taqiyya or hiding, because if you became openly Muslim, there would be a lot of persecution that took place against you. So what happened? Rasulullah invites them to join in, and gives the tabligh to them to join into the message to Islam. Now at that point in time, according to the traditions, we come forward and find that even there are some of our books and some of our scholars, Shaykh Tusi comments on this, who say at that point in time he invited the influential people in society, and when Rasulullah invited the influential people in society, while he's giving them the message, it's like a closed meeting of a few people, like in the mosque, but it's, alaykum salam, in the mosque, but it's only influential people. In that environment, a man who is blind, poor blind man, comes to Rasulullah, and then he says, I don't have time, I'm very busy, can you give me the message? Can you tell me what you're going to say? I just want to hear it from you. So this gathering is happening of the influential people in Mecca. Rasulullah has invited them and he's giving them the message. And then a poor blind man comes to Rasulullah, who's not on the invitee list, so to speak. And then Rasulullah says to him, and then when he asks, can you tell me the message? Rasulullah turns away and frowns. This is even found in some of our traditions. Shaykh Tusi says, this comes from people who have just seen or heard hadiths, and they have not verified them, and they just put them in however they feel. So Shaykh Tusi comments on this, said, how is it possible that Rasulullah, you and I wouldn't do this? How is it possible? Alaykum salam. How is it possible that Rasulullah is giving da'wah, he's giving a tabligh, and he's inviting people, and just one poor blind man comes, and then Rasulullah will act in such a way where he frowns and turns away as if you're not invited here? We wouldn't do this. How would Rasulullah, who is the absolute role model for society, do this? This is a very important point for us to reflect. And that says that even all of our books we accept are not 100% authentic. For example, what? For example, Biharul Anwar. Biharul Anwar by Allama Majlisi is a huge work. There's at least 110 volumes. In fact, I was speaking to some book publishers from our community, and they were saying there's more than 110 volumes. In fact, there's 120, and there's certain chapters or volumes that the Iranian government doesn't allow them to be published because of their openness in certain things. But there are more than that. But it's famous that there's 110. Now, these are not chapters. These are volumes. So you can imagine how much material is there. So is everything in Biharul Anwar authentic? No. Even our ulama say there are certain Israeliyat that have come into Biharul Anwar. And when you understand the ethos as to why Allama Majlisi put together Biharul Anwar, he himself says, I created Biharul Anwar to get all of our hadith in one place. Now it's up to the scholars to come forward and say this is correct and this is not correct. The ulama to come and say this is authentic, this is not authentic. That's why you will find many traditions that are not authentic, even within Biharul Anwar. To the extent that Usul al-Kafi, which is our most authentic book or of hadith that is well known, even in that we know that that's not 100%. Now there are some scholars who say 100% that is even authentic. Of course, if you would ask the main scholars, for example Najaf, the top scholars, they would say roughly about 2/3 of that is correct, even 1/3 is contentious. I say this because we need to be careful that we don't just take up any hadith and run with it. It needs to be verified. So now coming back to this, in our books even some of these hadiths came that, oh, Abasa wa Tawalla, Rasulullah had a closed meeting or a private meeting with certain influencers in society and said, oh, this is the message of Islam, bring Islam. And then one person came who was blind and poor, and then Rasulullah, based on the fact that he was not invited, Rasulullah turned away and became sick. Sheikh Tusi says, how can we accept this? This is absurd, absolutely absurd. So what is the third interpretation, which is the correct one? Remember, the first one, according to Ahl Sunnah, our brothers and sisters, the person who's being addressed here is Rasulullah. And that is because some poor man came and there was no context there. Then there's a group that says it was Rasulullah, but there was a very specific context that it was a closed meeting, this person came when they weren't supposed to be. Now there's a third one, which is the correct one. What is the correct one? According to the riwayat, there was this meeting in their gathering where Rasulullah had invited certain individuals to give them the message of Islam. Now when he invited them to give the message of Islam, at that point in time, one of the chieftains of Mecca was sitting there, and the poor man came and sat next to him. When a poor blind man came and sat next to him, according to the narrations, this chieftain who had a high prestige position in Mecca, he just moved a little bit away at that. And he frowned, and he turned away from the blind man. He turned away and frowned. According to the riwayat, there's a difference of opinion. Some Shia scholars have said this was Uthman bin Affan, the third Khalifa who became the third Khalifa of the Muslims, who is the one who frowned and turned away. According to other ulama, they say no, that we don't know the name. It was one of the chiefs of Quraysh, one of the prominent Meccans who were influential in society, but we don't know the name. It could have been Uthman, could have been someone else. And when this poor blind man came, they turned away at that point in time. And then the third verse comes, وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ لَعَلَّهُ يَزَّكَّى. And what maketh thee to know that he would cleanse himself? How do you know he wouldn't cleanse himself? Now, at this point in time, based on the tonality of this verse, you would think that it's referring to Rasulullah. What's the answer to this? Does anyone know? According to the Mufassirin? So how do you know? How do you know that he won't be cleansed of this, whatever you see negative in him, O chief of Quraysh? And according to Mufassirin, it's very clear that Allah is saying to Rasulullah. Because remember, the Quraysh would not believe in this anyways. They weren't believing in this. And if they weren't believing in this at that point in time, then what does that mean? If they weren't believing in this, then what's the point of saying, then how do you know you won't cleanse yourself? So at that point in time, it's Rasulullah saying, say to them, tell them, how do you know he won't cleanse himself? And that's how we interpret it. Why are these verses so important? The first three verses are so powerful. Because if you believe that this is referring to Rasulullah, which many Muslims do, then how do we take Rasulullah on as a role model? Where Rasulullah, God forbid, na'udhu billah, if a poor blind man comes to him, he frowns and turns away, how is it possible? Rasulullah is a role model for us in every aspect of life, and especially ethics. So how is it possible? But yet, till this day, the vast majority of the Muslim community still believes this. Another thing, there are still Muslims, believe me, there's a very famous narration I'll share with you that's written in the books, that there was an attempt to do black magic on Rasulullah. Now when this attempt, when this attempt was done, Jibreel was told that, oh Rasulullah, this attempt has been made. Of course, nothing will impact you, because you are from the mukhlisin and all of these things. Because remember, the prophets are not subjected to the black magics, as in they are the ones who have come to guide. They're much above. The example of Musa and the magicians is very clear there. Now, still till this day, there are some Muslims who say that magic that was attempted to have been done on Rasulullah impacted him. Now, if you believe, Hasha lillah, if you believe that Rasulullah could be impacted by people's attempts to do magic on him, then what does that do about the message? Then na'udhu billah, he can make mistakes, na'udhu billah, he can be affected by this. So these verses seem very straightforward, but the implications of what's being stated here are magnanimous. They're huge. So if you believe that Rasulullah, God forbid, his position is, he's not the perfect moral standard, and he can make a mistake that you and I would not even make to turn away from a blind person, then that leaves the door open for so many other issues. Oh, did Rasulullah convey every word as is of Jibreel? Did he make a mistake there? That's why it's very important to understand the position of Rasulullah. Unless and until as we as a Muslim society are not convinced and understanding of the maqam of Rasulullah and the position of Rasulullah, how then can we understand the Quran in its truest sense? The Quran is we understand the interpretation of the Quran by the presence and the being of Rasulullah himself. So it's very important for us to understand. So as we conclude, inshallah, we have, I think we just have to conclude here, but just a summary for those who may have missed it. Abasa wa tawalla, it refers to, according to the Ahl Sunnah scholarship and their Mufassirin, Abasa wa tawalla, he frowned and turned away, refers to Rasulullah doing that. Of course, we do not accept that in that context. There's one tradition, there's some traditions according to some Shia scholars, according to Sheikh Tusi, that they have not verified what's been said here, and are saying that there was a closed group gathering where Rasulullah had invited certain people to come for the message of Islam, and one poor blind man came and asked Rasulullah, I'm in a hurry, I'm in a rush, can you give me the message? And Rasulullah turned away and frowned. Of course, we don't accept this either. Sheikh Tusi is very clear on this, that how is it possible? It's not possible. So who was the person? The person was he was a chieftain of Mecca for sure, someone who had respect in Mecca, and when the poor and blind man came and sat next to him, he kind of moved away, in a way as if like, who are you to sit next to me? And some scholars have said it was Uthman bin Affan, others have said he's nameless, we don't know the name. So this is very important to know. When Abasa wa Tawalla is referred here, it's not referring to the Holy Prophet ﷺ, because he is the most immaculate. Inshallah, life permitting, inshallah, we will continue tomorrow. Any questions, comments, concerns anyone has? Otherwise, we will conclude here. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل